For the children of Gaza, Israel's war has turned schools into places of shelter rather than learning. 625,000 young Palestinians have been out of school for more than 8 months. Gaza's children make up nearly 16,000 of the more than 37,000 people killed since October the 7th. Aid agencies say a further 3,500 kids are malnourished and on the brink of death. And an estimated 17,000 young Palestinians have been orphaned. NGOs say bereaved children are struggling to cope and some of them are suicidal. Joining us now on Al Jazeera is Arwa Damon, who's the founder and president of the NGO Inara. She's joining us from Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Arwa, very good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. You're in Gaza, I understand, on a humanitarian mission with your charity, Inara, International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. And this is your second time there, I understand, since the war began in October. Talk to us about what you've witnessed during this trip and how the situation compares to when you were there last.
You know, it's exponentially more dire, more desperate, if that is even possible. And what you have on top of, this ongoing psychological obliteration when it comes to both the adults and also the children is this sort of ominous undertone. And that is this increase that, we're seeing, but that is also being reported in looting and criminal activity. Because what one needs to understand, and this is something that tragically happens, when we're talking about any sort of war dynamic with this level of deprivation of the basic necessities needed for human life. And that is that you see the moral code beginning to erode. And so, I was talking to a father yesterday who was telling me that his 5-year-old son, imagine just 5 years old, coming up to him and saying, Daddy, maybe it would have been better if we had just died and stayed at home rather than having to live like this. And he was further talking about how, the next war is going to happen once the bombs stop. And you hear this repeatedly over and over again. There is the war within each individual, because a lot of people will tell you that right now, despite all of this madness, all of this tragedy, it's also providing a certain level of a distraction from the true measure, the scale, the scope of everything that has been lost. And you have children that are beginning to exhibit all sorts of signs of severe and traumatic psychological distress. And when it comes to specifically the humanitarian sector, no one who works within the humanitarian sector has really been confronted, with this level of need and loss.
Right.
And sheer and total devastation.
Right, and I'll ask you a little bit more about your work in the humanitarian sector, because you're working on setting up medical stations and expanding the number of shelters there in Gaza, and you're specifically focusing on children. Talk to us more about the children, Arwa. How are they coping? Those who have survived this war so far, how are they doing?
I mean, at this stage when we're talking about sort of mental health interventions for children, because the traumas are still ongoing, because the triggers are constantly there, the buzz of the drones is sort of like this ongoing taunt of, oh, you think you've survived, but wait, death can still come. When we talk about interventions for children, it very much really focuses in the space of providing a distraction. So it's activities, like play, like music, like dancing. But then what we're also trying to do is provide children with, basic educational kits. But then you have, other things as well that we're trying to get into Gaza, but that have actually been stuck for the last 2.5 months now, pretty much ever since the Rafah border crossed. And that is things like children's shoes. Just driving to this location this morning, you see children who don't have shoes, who are running around barefoot in areas where there is sewage. You have this growing increase of, disease. And then you have this very sort of basic reality, and that is that when a child is scared or in pain, they turn to their parents to try to find comfort. These very basic pillars of stability have been fully eradicated for children. So what we try to do is build them up in the barest way possible. But when you talk to children, they don't use the rhetoric, the language of children anymore. They use the language of adults. And that is extraordinarily jarring to see and to experience and to witness.
And I imagine what's even more heartbreaking is seeing their parents not being able to bring them that comfort that a parent usually brings to their children. Arwa, you've worked in war zones for over 2 decades, both as a journalist and a humanitarian. And as a journalist, you've covered many conflicts in Syria, Mosul, in Iraq, and the offensive against ISIL there. What's been your experience like going into Gaza, and how is the suffering that you've witnessed there different from some of the other conflicts that you've covered? What makes, for example, the trauma of children in Gaza different from what you've seen elsewhere?
You know, I was trying to put my finger on it, and one, doesn't like comparing one war zone to another person's pain, to another. But there is something that is markedly different about Gaza, and it is the sheer and total psychological obliteration. It's really the way that the traumas, the triggers, are relentless. There is no escaping. There is no respite. There is no room to breathe. And you really sense this constantly. It's not, in some of these other areas where if you survive one bombing, you're able to move to safe space. Because here there is no concept of safe space. And then it's the sheer magnitude, the scale, and the time with which it has happened. The other day, I met a little girl in hospital. She's 5 years old. Shrapnel shredded her abdomen. Her gut spilled out. She's in hospital bed next to her baby brother, who is covered in burns. And she's being comforted by her aunt, who is filled with such tenderness and love towards this little girl that it's a beautiful thing to witness. And then you realize that the aunt is now also going to have to fulfill the role of the mother, because these two little children's parents are both dead. They just don't know that yet. There's also another issue that is of great and pressing and utmost urgent concern, and this is related to the closing of the Rafah border, because it wasn't just a main artery for humanitarian assistance, it was also the only exit point. And right now, according to the World Health Organization, there are 14,000 people in Gaza who need to be medically evacuated, who have emergency medical situations. They need to be able to get out. And I met one of these little boys in the last 48 hours as well. If this child, who also has shrapnel injury to the abdomen, does not manage to get out of Gaza, he is going to either find himself, best case scenario, with a permanent disability. Worst case scenario, he is going to die. Children, adults' lives are at stake, not just from the bombs, but from the lack of medical access into Gaza, but also the fact that their only evacuation point has been blocked off as well.
And which brings me to my next question, Arwa, the challenges. What challenges do you face operating a humanitarian organization inside Gaza today, and why is it so difficult to move aid around?
It's impossible on so many levels, and you're constantly sort of trying to play mental gymnastics, figuring out how to navigate the plethora of challenges that are in front of you. And the challenges start with, first and foremost, actually getting the trucks into Gaza. It is this extraordinarily lengthy process. Right now, the only access point, especially to the south, is Karam Abu Salim. And there, the trucks go through extensive screenings. It's excruciatingly slow. Add to all of it, you also have the challenge that humanitarian organizations don't have a say in what actually gets to come in. And so what we end up seeing, actually, is Israel giving priority to commercial trucks. If you look at the numbers right now, more than 2/3 of trucks that have been able to enter the southern part of Gaza, mind you, in extremely low numbers, but 2/3 of those trucks are commercial trucks, which means that goods end up on the market where the vast majority of people can't afford them. Once goods have actually managed to get through this search process, you then have the challenge of getting them from the checkpoint to the warehouse. There is a growing sense of lawlessness. There is criminal activity. There are looters. There are gangs, who are trying to target humanitarian aid. And the trucks have to navigate this whole, gauntlet of challenges just to get to the warehouse. And then there's movement within Gaza itself. North to south, south to north does not happen, full stop. But then just getting the permissions to move within Gaza, it's extraordinarily painful. It's painstaking when you are finally able, to get something to someone. To be frank, you feel as if it's so small because the need is so great. But I was talking to one of our Inara colleagues about this yesterday, and she's like, listen, we're working for our people. These are our children. This is our future. And even if it's something small, even if all we're able to offer is a smile, it is still our duty to do that.
Arwa, before we let you go, just one last question. Right now, we are at a point politically where nothing is happening. Negotiations to end the war have stalled. There's now fear of an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel. Is there any hope left among the people of Gaza that this could come to an end soon?
You know, hope is a cruel beast in the sense that one can't live without hope. But then the minute hope rises and then is crushed, as it is every single time there is talk of a potential ceasefire, it really sinks a person's psyche into depths that were entirely unimaginable. You know, being here, you know, obviously people see that I'm a foreigner, and you do get this constant question of, oh, you know, ask her, she's from the outside, maybe she knows when this is going to end. And it is gutting to not be able to answer that, because people cannot take this anymore. But at the same time, there is this sense of having to keep going. And a lot of Gazans, when you talk to them, you know, they don't want to be called resilient. They have been forced into this position. They don't want to be called superheroes. They have been forced to be superheroes. They are exhausted. And so is there hope that this is going to end one day? Yes, of course, to a certain degree. But then every once in a while, you talk to people and they say, no, like, it's gone, it's been eradicated. We're moving forward because, you know, we have children, because we don't have a choice, because we have to live. And you see these moments where people try to create joy. They try to create love. They try to create, you know, a little bit of the life that was for each other. But it's just fractions of moments. I mean, the level of fatigue that every single person here carries on their shoulders, within their psyche, is so palpable. It really hits you. It hits you in the gut, and it grabs you by the throat.
Arwa, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you for the important work you are doing in Gaza right now. Arwa Damon, founder and president of the NGO Inara, joining us there from Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Thank you very much for your time.